My name is Dan Essery, and I live in Kenora, Ontario. I've lived there all my life. I'm a retired school teacher and administrator. I worked in the public education system there for 30 years until I retired in 2004, at which time I was recruited by a former colleague of mine for an Aboriginal teacher education program that Seven Generations runs. And they wanted me, because I was a school principal at the time, and our geographic area is so broad, to do visits to teachers when they were on placement in First Nations communities or public schools. And so to me it was kind of an ideal retirement job because I could use the skills that I had developed. And the second part of it was I was interested in Seven Generations because, having worked in the public school system, we saw Aboriginal students generally that came into our community at the grade 9 level, and I worked at an intermediate school for a while, and so saw students coming in from their First Nation communities for the first time to local schools. And I was also a high school English teacher earlier in my career, and just realized that when these students came to town, as it were, it always seemed that they were behind the 8 ball, and their skills weren't up to par with the rest of the students, which is a whole conversation about standards in First Nations communities. But there was also the social transition, because they were coming into a community where they were in a minority now, and it was very awkward for them. They were being billeted in homes of strangers, and so these students had so many things to cope with that I thought that they didn't have the success which they deserved. So I thought, in my retirement at least, if I could kind of do my bit to and use my skills to improve that situation, I would. So that's how I got to Seven Generations in the first place. Here we go. I'm not going to try to go backwards here, I don't think. Let's fail.
Page up.
Yeah, just point arrow up, we'll do it, or
arrow up
back.
will do it?
Yeah. Gotta get out of that though.
Yeah, get over there now.
There you go.
Okay,
I think it's the down button.
There you go. Thank you. This is a map of our geographic area. We work in the Treaty 3 First Nation territory, and that runs basically from, if it was identified, Winnipeg would be kind of around in here, Thunder Bay would be around here. It's about a 700 kilometer stretch, north, south, east, west there, and in that area there's the community of Kenora, Dryden, Sulakaut is here. Just to give you an idea of the area we cover, and within that region there are 30 First Nations, half of whom are on the Lake of the Woods English River water system.
X out of that.
It's easy for you to say. I want to give you a little bit of history about our learners first, because I think it's important because of the unique circumstances in which some of these 30 First Nations find themselves. So I'm just going to briefly touch on some of the recent history. This is a picture of the White Dog Power Dam. It's on the English River system. And Ontario Hydro in the 1950s decided to dam a couple of spots on the Winnipeg River system for the power that the province needed. In so doing, they flooded out the traditional First Nations communities who were located there. And that included cemeteries, homes, and communities had to be relocated. In one instance, 2 First Nations had to combine. They combined them into one First Nation, which can be a Hatfields and McCoy kind of situation, but it basically uprooted people from their traditional lands and put them in a a whole new situation. What happened following that was about 30 years later, Ontario Hydro started to acknowledge the fact that it had decimated these communities, and so it started making settlements with them. So it took that number of years to move through the court system, and so some of these First Nations started to get compensation, and that compensation, a significant portion of which was to go to education, because they realized they had disrupted the education system. They were also compensating people for loss of their livelihood, because wild rice harvesting that people had relied on was gone, and trapping areas had been devastated, and people could no longer do that. And the other thing that it signified was a move away from the traditional people living in the traditional way, because they could no longer be self-sustaining. So the government and the power companies started trying to, I don't know if it was appease the people or appease their own consciences, but they started making compensation in a similar fashion to the way residential schools have done lately. In the 1970s, this is a picture of the Reed Paper Company in Dryden. This is their mill. And it was discovered in the 1970s that they had been dumping, as part of their operation, mercury into the Winnipeg River system. So this water system that I pointed out earlier, they had been dumping mercury in there, and of course it made its way through the entire water system up into many of these First Nations which were located along the river system. What occurred was the fishery was shut down because the mercury was in the fish. The people ate the fish, and so they started investigating this and found a high incidence of what was called Minamata disease. It was mercury poisoning, basically. So the communities who had, for generations, been eating this fish were now finding that children such as what Papa say here, with Minamata disease. So following that, there was extensive study done. People from Japan, the Minamata disease is something that was first discovered in Japan, and I think it was following the First World War when people had been poisoned by the effects of war. So they recognized the symptoms. Scientists from Japan came over to these First Nations communities to help them deal with the health problems that arose from it. Chiefs and councils from these First Nations went over to Japan to try to talk to the people to see how they had recovered. But again, obviously it was a huge impact on the communities, and it also caused a closure of the tourist camps, which again was a large employer. A lot of these people worked as guides and were employed by the tourist companies who ran operations in their traditional territories. So, as a result of that, and it only took about 10 years for this one to follow, the government and the paper companies again started compensating the First Nations communities to say, look, we realize that we've struck you yet again, we've taken away your livelihood, we're going to give you money. So between two First Nations, which had about a total of 1,000 people maybe, they received $16.7 million in compensation, which again they were to use for health primarily, to try to address the problem that so many of their residents suffered from, but also for education. Each time it was realized that that part of the way out of this was to educate people. So some of that money was to be used towards that. However, all of it wasn't, and some of the First Nations decided, one in particular, that they were just going to pay their members. Okay, we got this big, it's again the residential school system, I'm sure you're familiar with that, and how that was administered. But some people were flat out cut a check. Well, if you're a family who's been affected by that, and you all of a sudden get a check for $2,000, you might buy a snowmobile. And so this article talks about the local economy and how Kenora got a boost from this because all these people came in for checks and just blew it and went back home with a snow machine that might last a season or two. But the long-term damage was already done. The paper company felt that their conscience was eased because they paid the people for the problem, and they carried on. The most recent, this is just taken a couple of years ago, the most recent round has been, these are protesters from Grassy Narrows blocking the Trans-Canada Highway in protest for the timber companies who were clear-cutting their land and again destroying their wild rice, destroying their trapping lines and ruining their economy, and for which they were receiving no compensation. So the health, the social and economic devastation that these communities faced was hit yet another time. So after all of that, to get around now to the education scene, what we ended up with was communities in our area whose students were behind, whose students didn't have the same advantages as we had. So we had students that faced a high in those communities, and a lot of this is due to the psychological devastation, because now we're talking about a 30-year period between then and now. So you've got a generation of people in those communities that's grown up with unemployed parents and depression, the suicide rates, the whole thing, because their future had been taken away from them essentially. So they didn't go to school. So attendance in the First Nations communities was typically very poor, and those that came into the community, came out of their First Nations to Kenora to try to escape that, faced the transition problems I was telling you about. So we've got a lot of students who don't have a secondary school diploma or the GED. There was a need for us to address. Because all of the employment had been pulled away from these people in the tourist camps, in the fishing industry, in the wild rice harvest and so on, we had a disproportionate number of people who were on Ontario Works. And the Ontario Works people, of course, are saying, we've got to get you employed so that you can help get yourself out of that situation. So Ontario Works is pressuring to get its clients into the workforce. There were workplace readiness programs required for these people because, again, you're talking about at least a generation of people who essentially didn't work, so don't understand all of the things that go into making you successful on a job. They don't have the skills in the first place, either the academic skills or the practical skills, but they also don't have the behavioral skills to get a job and continue to hold it. So that was a challenge for these communities as well. College readiness programs, students that we test typically couldn't pass a mature students test in order to qualify to take a college level program, nor could they handle the college curriculum and some of the courses that we offer. Personal support worker, for instance, if we put some of those textbooks in front of these people, no matter how well intended they were and we are, it's beyond them. Therefore, we needed to do something prior to that to get these people prepared, even if they were motivated and had the opportunity to take a college level course. And college and university, the problem just escalates the higher up you go. But the higher paying jobs even in the First Nations required people with social work skills, teachers, band administrators, financial people who would need university level education, and they didn't have it. Challenges that these communities face: remote. Kenora is remote. We're 200 kilometers from Winnipeg. We're 500 from Thunder Bay. We're a small community. These communities are 2 and 3 hours from Kenora. They generally have a small number of people in them. So transportation is costly for these people. Poor roads in the winter time, so even if they want to come out and take programs, that's a challenge for them. technology, when we try to move into communities and use our Plato programming, for instance, all of the communities don't have good access to the internet, so we end up, as part of our job, having to bring in self-sustaining units to run these programs in the classroom. But then when the people leave and you want them to do independent work on computers, they're poor. They can't pay for internet access. They don't have computers, so that whole technology arm that's so useful to us, again, they don't have. Yes?
Is it possible to go into community and set up like a LAN network, or?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's what we end up
Yeah.
attempting to do
Yeah.
in order just to deliver our programs.
Okay.
Student recruitment is an issue for us. In order for us to offer a program, we need a minimum of enrollment, say, of 15 students. Well, in these communities that we're going into, it's hard to find 15 bodies that may be interested or able to take a program. And the communities are small and isolated, so you might have 7 people in Grassy Narrows, and then 100 kilometers away you might have 6 people in White Dog, and you might have a few more in Shoal Lake. But we can't run a program in each of those communities, so we have to either bring them into town or bring them into each other's communities, which is transportation cost accommodation. So again, huge challenge there. And once we get them there, it's retaining them. We'll generally start with 15 students in a program, knowing that within 4 months we'll have 7 students in that program, and we might graduate 4. And that's for all of the social problems that interfere. Alcohol, drug abuse is still a big part of some of these communities. So there are family pressures, childcare issues, death in the community, and the rigors of attendance. These people are not used to doing something every day, going to class and disciplining themselves to that. So after a few weeks of enthusiasm, saying, wow, they're getting ground down, and off they go. So that's an issue, retention. Qualified instructors, we tend to run 8 to 12-week programs when we're able to. So to try to find somebody from Kenora, which has a pool of, say, retired teachers who may be able to work for 8 to 12 weeks at a time and then do nothing for 6 months, we can't get people that say, we can't promise full-time work to people. Therefore, it's difficult for us to recruit instructors. So we tend to get retired teachers, and if they're willing to travel and do all that's necessary, but we don't have that luxury of, as soon as we've got a program, we've got an instructor. Many of the instructors that we do get are unqualified as well. Therefore, I'll talk about the way I've had to set up the curriculum, knowing that I'm not giving this curriculum to teachers all the time. I'm sometimes giving it to people who just happen to have some background and some skills that they could use in the classroom. Competing institutions, even in these sparse areas, we still have to compete with other institutions like Confederation College, for instance, which operates out of Thunder Bay, runs the same kind of programs as we do. So if there are 10 students that want a PSW course, we're having to compete with Confederation College for those, and it's a big, well-funded institution, whereas Seven Generations is just always, pulling for funding wherever we can get it. So that's a difficulty we face as well. Funding priorities. Some of the First Nations, even if they do have funding, don't all value education the same way. Some of them want to spend their money in other ways. So even if the money is in the community, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to see that they should produce policemen or social workers or personal support workers for the community. They may choose to use that money in other fashions. So again, we're always sort of pressuring them to say, keep a chunk of your money for these kind of programs. It's going to help you in the long run. And employment opportunities too. In these communities, there are typically no employment opportunities. So if you get somebody trained, what they're looking at, we recently graduated a group of personal support workers. They're screaming for personal support workers in Kenora, like they can't get enough of them. Aboriginal personal support workers, even more so, because a lot of the people who are in the long-term care facilities are Aboriginal, and they want somebody that who they can relate to. So I mean, the jobs are just waiting we get qualified PSWs, they will not leave their community to commute for an hour and a half a day to their job, or move away from their family in order to earn that money and then, you know, go home on weekends sort of thing. So all of those are challenges that we have to deal with. So, 7 Generations has been in operation since 1985, and so we just celebrated our 25th anniversary a couple of years back. This is sort of the mission statement and some of the things that 7 Generations sort of dedicates itself to, and maybe make it a little bit unique to some of our competitors. Key points are the lifelong learning that we're focused on adult education more than we are on students in the elementary and secondary school system. The Anishinaabe, I can't say it properly, and that's a disability I have.
Anishinaabemowin.
Thank you. And that's the language, and that's the importance of language to the Ojibwe culture. And so that is built into the programming, because they realize if the language is lost, then so is much of their culture and their history. Community-based is a huge factor for us. We try to take our programs into the communities, realizing that these people have too many challenges to bring them to get themselves any distance into a community to do this. So we try to take our programs to them wherever possible. And it's all geared to get Anishinaabe people working. So it's an affirmative action kind of thing where non-Aboriginals only get what spots remain. Preference is always given to Aboriginal people. And again, I think there's a comfort level for some of the learners in our area to come into that kind of a setting. The reason most of them left the conventional public school system was they were the minority. They didn't understand the way it was taught to the people that were around. This reverses the scale, so I think that helps our organization. Just a quick word. 7 Generations is part of the World Indigenous Nations Higher Education Consortium, which is a group of nations. I think the first ones were Peru and Peru, Norway, United States, Taiwan, a group of people who came together in 2002 and were dedicating themselves to trying to work, trying to share things internationally, if you will, on a global scale for what was working, because Indigenous people, no matter where they're located in the world, seem to have common issues around education, and especially higher education. So this group meets once or twice a year and exchanges ideas, and also one of their jobs is to inspect institutions and schools who are based on these principles, like 7 Generations, which is an institution primarily for our Aboriginal people. They go around and evaluate them, if you will, to see if they meet the criteria to get the stamp of WINHEC, which again indicates that they're providing their programming to Aboriginal people at a higher level. And that's what they look like. Our that's the group at one of their gatherings. Our over in the corner there, that right there, those two are 7 Generations. That's our CEO Delbert Horton and his wife Laura, they were inaugural members, founding members of the WINHEC group. 7 Generations. This is our staff. We have about 50 full-time employees, and in our calendar here, which you're welcome to look at some point if you're interested, 50 full-time teachers and many part-time contractors. As I say, when we do a course, these aren't the people that go out and teach in the communities on these short-term programs. These are people who are employed on a regular basis. We do academic and cultural programs, apprenticeship training, college certificate and diploma programs, and university diploma and degree programs as well. The sites where we deliver are sometimes where this is Big Grassy First Nation, which is about 3.5 hours from Kenora. That's one of our classroom sites. When we're in a community, we take what the community can provide. So we may be in a church, we may be in a recreation facility, we may be sharing with a daycare, we may be in a school library. But primarily, we try to deliver the programs in these communities to make it as easy as possible for people to get there.
Are your programs your programs?
I will tell you about that in a minute. Yes,
Okay.
yes and no. Some of them are,
Okay.
some of them are not.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you in a minute how we do business. Community sites. This is our office in Kenora. It's a downtown location, so some of the communities bus groups of students in. Other students drive in for programs, but we have 5 classrooms in this facility in downtown Kenora that people can come into. This is our location in Dryden, and if you could read the fine print, it says 7 Generations Education Institute coming soon. So there we're sharing space, classroom space with other groups like Confederation College, other competitors, but that's an actual learning center that a number of facilities share in Dryden. This is a school at which I was principal a short time before my retirement, but due to declining enrollments, we had 750 students when I was there 12 to 15 years ago. They now have less than 300. So the whole shrinking of the system makes school buildings become surplus, and so we're looking at, along with another group, purchasing this building and then sharing it with places like Confederation College, other Aboriginal service agencies. The gymnasium is going to be turned into a local arts center. So these are some of the ways we're looking at in the future of being able to offer programming. And if enough funding comes with that, to set up a residence there as well, so that people can come in without having to stay in hotels, which they often have to do, and to put a sweat lodge there as well, so that we can carry on the traditional part of our programming. So those are some of the different sites that we use. A big component of the program, because we're an Anishinaabe organization, is culture. So some of these pictures, they're showing wild rice harvesting and fishing. That's our Play-Doh coordinator cleaning some fish. And these pictures are taking place at the fall harvest, where we present on our grounds a lot of these traditional ways of life, and schools are invited in from the communities to participate and get taught about traditional Aboriginal ways. That's the head of our post-secondary programming, Laura, showing people about cleaning geese. And this is a picture of our Masters of Social Work class, and they've just recently completed a program. But you can see that in their program, because they're doing social work in our area with a lot of First Nations people, some of the things that you'll find in that MSW program that you might not find in others are they do drum making, they go to sweat lodges, they learn about the traditional way of dress and have ceremonies. So that kind of Aboriginal content is built into all of the programs. The other Aboriginal content that is part of our mandate to include that in all programs. So we have an Indigenous Wellness and Addiction Prevention program, which is basically training social workers about traditional ways of life so that they can better service communities in which those values are still present. So instead of just your conventional social work degree and then you walk into a First Nation community and say, and just doing all the wrong stuff, we can build that into our program. In our college readiness program, one of the prime courses is contemporary issues facing Aboriginals. So we look at college from the point of view of Aboriginal people, the challenges that they'll face not only in their schooling, but also that they are facing in their communities. So that's built into the education. And the program that originally I got recruited for, we have an Aboriginal teacher education program which we offer in conjunction with Queen's University. And part of that program requires the students to do a placement in a First Nations community, and they also learn on how to bring Aboriginal content into the classroom. And that's a unique program, at least in our province, I believe, to Queen's University. And it should be, unfortunately it hasn't been, the greatest recruiting tool for 7 generations to say, you get your Aboriginal teacher education program, I'll give you work. As it turns out, the people who graduate from that, and there are a high number of Aboriginal candidates because they get preference in getting in, either go to other jobs that are higher paying, or go to school boards who will pay more than the First Nations will pay. So you end up only getting the real dedicated person that's saying, I'm going to come back and I'm going to teach my community and make it better. So that's a frustration because we've really, systemically, we've set it up so that we should be able to, fill our own, meet our own needs, but it hasn't worked that way necessarily. In terms of employment in our area, there are 2 main sources of employment that we're looking at currently. Advanced wood processing. The paper mills in our area are shutting down. Kenora has just recently lost a paper mill that it's had for over 100 years, and it was the backbone of employment in the community. Is gone now, so that affects not only that has devastated our community. We're one of those places that's reinventing itself. But one of the things that they're looking at now is advanced wood processing instead. We've had a mill open up recently that builds trusses. Truss Joyce was the company that came in, and they had a hiring policy that, an affirmative action policy for Aboriginal workers. So if we can train people to the right point, there are jobs waiting for them in the advanced wood processing industry. And mining, as it is out here, is taking off. They're reopening gold mines in the Red Lake area, and the Rainy River area. They're drilling, and they're going to build a mine there. So huge number of jobs, more probably than we can fill from our First Nations community. But all of a sudden, we've got this generation of non-working people, and then this huge flurry of activity that just says, give us something and we'll give you a job. So the employment potential is great there. So our programs have been geared towards the trades because we think that's where the jobs are going to be available. It's realistic for us to get our population from where they are now to a point where they're ready to do some of the entry-level jobs in a mine or in a mill. So that's been the focus of our literacy and essential skills programs to this point. So so we set up literacy and essential skills program. You knew finally I'd get to talk about what we have to do educationally. But I think that background is all important to our mission there. And in our literacy and essential skills program, somebody mentioned this morning, I don't know if somebody that's still in this room, but the fellow that was doing the presentation from Douglas College said that there's a curriculum in Ontario that's used in essential skills. This is one that we found, and somebody mentioned WorkRight. Pathways to Possibilities is the name of this resource, and I have, if you're interested in looking at it, I brought a sample of one of these books that's used just for you to look at to see the level of material, the organizational approach that they use in this program.
What's the name of the program?
Pathways to Possibilities, PTP. And the contact information is on here, so they have a website, so you can check it out. And I could talk to you about it because we made quite an investment in it. What we wanted to do was find a program that could be kind of the core program, and we use the core resource that we used, and then we would build our supplementary resources around that. But to find a fundamental approach that was friendly to the kind of students that would be using it. So anyway, we settled on that. It's a program that has those 5. It's set up in a workbook type of fashion, so it's a paper-oriented resource. The only thing that we combine with it is life skills, so we do the math, document use, reading, writing stuff. But we have a life skills component too, because we realize there are all sorts of things beyond the academic skills that these people will need in order to succeed in the workplace. So we found a program produced by the YWCA out of Toronto called Discovering Life Skills. And one component of our curriculum is devoted to that, and that's the prime resource that's used for it. The other thing that we appreciated about the PTP program is that there's a built-in assessment piece with it. So the first test up in the top left is a placement test. So we get students that have maybe are in their 50s or 60s, haven't been in school since grade 8, are interested in getting employed now, haven't got a hot clue, we don't, of what their skill level is. This placement test starts from, we sit down together and I ask you 5 simple questions about a work schedule, about a very simple work schedule, to see if you can process enough of that to answer those questions correctly. If not, essentially we don't have a program for you, because that's kind of our base level, entry level for the programs that we offer. If they do, then they continue on with this placement test, which generally takes students maybe an hour tops, and I have a copy of it here. Again, if you're interested and want to see what it's about, you can look at it. And then from there, we can get an idea of their basic skill level, their essential skill level, and then start talking about how we build a program or how we place them in a program that we've already got set.
Yeah, you mentioned about students that, for the want of a better term, don't qualify.
Yes.
What are you able to offer them? Anything?
We aren't, just a referral
To
to some of the other agencies in the community who might do basic literacy. So there are other organizations that they could go to bring their skills to a point where then they would be able to come in and benefit from our programming, but we don't, no, because we're generally offering high school level programming. This is the lowest level, for lack of a better word, programming that we offer is level 1. And to look at it, I don't necessarily talk the same essential skills language as a lot of you do in terms of your levels. PTP is set up on a 3-level system. There's level 1, 2, and 3. There are 5 levels. But here is the, on that, the cut scores, you can see the LBS levels 1 to 5 and the percentages. So this is taken from the placement test. So overall, the student who wrote this test got 35%, for instance. Down below it tells you what level the student would be at on the 5-level scale. And then the box to the side says, learners placed in level 1 or 2 will be challenged by essential skills level 1 materials. So it puts those first 2 into level 1. It takes level 3 or 4 materials. Those are level 2 students. And the ones that score at level 5 LBS take the level 3 materials. And I'll show you those in a second. So that places them into the program we've got. And I'll show you how the program is set up to
What's LBS?
Literacy and basic skills.
There we go.
It's Ontario's literacy.
Oh, okay,
basics.
Oh,
yeah,
Ontario.
again, I don't know if I'm talking.
Yeah, that's
It's only
Ontario's.
Okay.
Okay.
Benchmark, it's kind of like, it's equivalency to the levels, is
Yes,
that it?
yep. Now, in these resource books then, so the students there, they come out as a level 2 student. So when we go into these resource books, the activities are set up, each of these books has activities for level 1, level 2, and level 3 students. It's not just this is the level 3 book, there's level 2. They all use the same book, but there is there's an index for each section that shows you, so you can see that the 2 check marks beside activity 8.1, level 2 activity. The 3 check marks beside activity 8.8, level 3 students. So again, gives you the opportunity to group your students and give them assignments. They're all working from the same book and nobody knows the difference. We're all doing this, so it doesn't matter if you're level 1 or level 3. You may be doing different activities, but from the same resource. So it's very good that way. We found it to be a fairly comprehensive approach to thinking. Now, Play-Doh. Next, I have to say to you, I've only been doing this for about 2 years. I mean, my history is with kids, you know, at the high school, so adult education, basic skills also brand new to me. So, but I'm put on the spot to say, you know, find us something that we can use to develop these kind of programs, because these programs are new to 7 generations. We focus traditionally on the college level courses, the university level courses, the high school courses, but none of this essential skills stuff. This is new to our organization, and they just throw it to me because I'm the guy that happened to be there to say, well, you're an educator, make it work. So anyway, in that whole process, Play-Doh was discovered. So at that point, and what we liked about Play-Doh, I guess I should say, is that it's an online, I mean, all of a sudden, to me as an educator now, we can talk about a balanced program. I did workbooks enough with students for enough years to know, you know, for a lot of students, they don't work anymore. And it's pretty, you know, if you're trying to get people back into the real world and you're hauling this stuff out again and you're not, you know, dealing with technology, some of these people who have never turned on a computer are going to be handicapped right from the get-go. So part of our job is to familiarize them with technology a little bit. So Play-Doh was an online learning tool that that had a lot to offer us, and so I thought, okay, let's look at this program more closely. The other, and I'm looking for an assessment piece to complement that, just like I did with the assessment and program. With Play-Doh, I thought, okay, now I need an assessment because it's a whole different animal than this is. So we found AccuAssess, and we've only found that in the last year or so, I think, and I'll talk a little more about what it does and doesn't do. But so when we found this, that was going to be a nice complement to the rest of our programming. Our biggest decision, though, became, do we develop a program? Which is your anchor program? Do you run a Play-Doh program and supplement it with this? Do you run this program and supplement it with Play-Doh? Because you really do have to make that decision. I mean, they're not that close that you don't have to say, okay, what route are we going to follow, and then how are we going to work the other one into it? So what Play-Doh had for us is a lot of stuff. I mean, it's the vast, the amount of content that's in there is huge, and as a teacher, that's what you need. You need to be able to go to something very quickly and say, you know, I just found out 5 minutes ago that Johnny needs some work on decimals. What have I got? I mean, it's got such a huge range of amount of material. It's got the range, you know, I mean, it's got material from elementary right up to to the end of high school, which covers the entire range of the students that we're working with, and it has assessments built into it, and I'll talk about AccuAssess in a minute. And not only does it have assessments, it has prescriptions for those assessments. So you've got a test that you can do, and you don't have to then tear your hair out and say, okay, now what am I going to do with this? In Play-Doh, it does it for you. So there's some beautiful things that we found in Play-Doh. Most of you have used it, so I'll kind of skip over this, but we like the way that the courses are set up, and then they're broken down into individual units. So if you pick a particular, and you can use any portion of that. You don't have to deliver an entire course. You can pick out a separate unit, and within each of those units, there's a pre-test, there are activities, there's a post-test, which is huge for us in terms of how you're monitoring student progress. It's a beautiful thing the way those are set up, and then there's an end of course test too, so it takes that pressure off teachers having to design tests all the time. That has been done for them. The tests are related entirely to the content. You don't have to worry about the skill level of the instructors, because as I told you, we get a real variety in levels. You just have to say, this is how it works, this is how you read it. So it was a very slick program. We tend to use, and here I'm going to get to one of the We tend not to use entire courses because of the length of time that we run our programs for. We don't have time. We generally run 8 to 12 week programs, so you don't get a lot of entire courses in that. What we tend to do is go to the Plato titles instead and pull individual topics out that we know students are weak in. The limitation of the titles is they don't have that same, an entire title. For instance, Advanced Reading Strategies doesn't have a pre-test for that whole title and a post-test. Now, within it, building your vocabulary, yes, there will be a test in there for that. There are mastery tests in each of these. I have found, I have little confidence in the long-term validity of mastery tests. It's the kind of thing where in an afternoon I did a unit on fractions, I wrote the mastery test, I passed it, away I went. My suspicion is 4 days later, 2 months later, you would not be able to do that. It's that immediate feedback. I need something that I can come back to a month later and say, did you retain that? Because if you didn't, then that, then what have we accomplished really? Yet it looks good. I mean, it can produce a nice record, but again, my gut feeling on that is I would rather have a unit test so that in 3 weeks you could see what you remember about that unit we did then. So that's one of the limitations. But again, the topics are so good. The format, the tutorial, the practice, and test, love it. That's all good stuff. Love the tracking with it too, and again, you know how that works where, students, you can go in as an instructor at any point and see how a student's been doing on the assignments that you've given them. The little stars indicate that they've completed it, or the bubble that shows you how far along they are and everything. Love that tracking feature. Again, it just takes a whole bunch of work away from an instructor, and that's what you want to be doing. And their daily progress report in particular, I think if you looked at that, you can see the completion columns. Sometimes they're half complete, sometimes they're complete, sometimes they haven't started them. The number of tries it took them to get it. What I really look at where these things are. The time on task column is really critical to me. I love that because it takes away all of the student, all of that exchange. Did you really do it, and how long did you work on that, and are you really ready? That really is a great tracking device. I mean, it has its limitations. It doesn't mean that was full focus time. There are ways, but it's a pretty good indication of how hard students are working on the assignments that you give them. So we find a lot of value in that column. So now, probably one of the most interesting things that I've done since we took Plato. So we've got PTP, we've got Plato. Now my big task became match them. So we're going to run these as parallel programs. So when they get a section in their curriculum, if we're doing math, we're going to be doing a little bit of PTP. We're going to be doing some Plato. This is a different language than Plato, fundamentally. I mean, it's math, it's reading, all those things. However, it was two very different creatures. So what we did was we went with our former colleague of Grant's, Donald Grant, and another Plato person and I sat down in Toronto for 2 days, put these curricula side by side and said, okay, if we're teaching this from PTP, what are we going to pull out of Plato to use at the same time? Because I wanted to be able to, and then my job became put that into a curriculum to say, on day 4, in math time, page this, then when they go on to the Plato program, go into this pathway, and then have a very sensible, well-coordinated program. So, we did that, and here's what it sort of looked like. And I have a copy of this here. It's not, I mean, this is just done by a couple of hacks in from Northwestern Ontario, and a professional. There's some guidance. So I mean, there are flaws in this, however, very helpful document, because what it did was, it was, so each page of this is broken into these areas, it's color coded, so the green is numeracy. So when we're in numeracy, you've got, in this column, the PTP module, which is count items and add prices, is something that's right out of the PTP curriculum. So we looked around, where do you find that in Plato? Well, we found it in foundational mathematics. Where? What module did we find? Adding two-digit numbers. So we built this resource which completely blended
Integrates.
the two programs, and it was very helpful then when it came time to put the curriculum together, because we had matched these two. It's an exercise you could do with whatever curriculum you chose. It's just these are the ones we chose, and this is how we did it. And I think that was a very useful exercise, and it's really helped us in terms of planning programs, which makes sense. Yes.
So can we get copies of that one?
I'll have to ask my agent.
I'll even pay you.
Yeah.
I'm sure we could work something out. So in our literacy and essential skills programs, we work in 4 areas, and we use titles primarily. So of the Plato titles, just to give you an idea of the extent of these 10,000 hours or however many instructional hours there are in Plato, what we use. In numeracy, we have found that's where we find all of the content we need for our literacy and essential skills programs. In numeracy are found in those programs. The reading skills are found in those, and you'll recognize these titles if you use the program. That's where we got all of our Plato content for the reading portion, document use there, and writing there. So we're able to, when I set up the curriculum into those 4 blocks of time, I'm pulling from those areas for each of the days I'm building a course. Talk a little bit, oh man, a little bit about assessment. We used to use the Canadian Adult Achievement Test. Now we're using, and it gave us results that I'm familiar with, that have been used for 25 years. I thought were fairly reliable and accurate. So we've been using those as an organization for a long time. But then we got into AccuSess. AccuSess doesn't work necessarily the same way. It gives you grade level scores. My question is, do those relate to, like, do they relate to the Canadian Adult Achievement Test scores, which I'm familiar with and I feel are accurate? So, AccuSess, if somebody wants to talk to me privately about that, we can. It's a very slick way to put students, and if you don't know it, talk to me about it privately. I'll just see if there's anything else I really have to say, Grant, because I know what you're saying.
So with AccuSess, you don't need to use,
Right.
with AccuSess, you basically replace CAT with that.
That's what we have done.
Yeah, okay.
And I don't know,
That's, yes.
but I don't know how I feel about that yet,
Yeah.
because I'm not convinced of the reliability of the AccuSess scores, because teachers are telling me they're high, they're low, they don't reflect what they see in the classroom from these students. When I said they were at a grade 7 level, the teachers either saying they weren't even close to that, or they're at a grade 10 level. So this chart shows you a comparison of 7 students we did, which show that essentially we noticed a 2 grade level difference between them. If you know
I
that,
think that's true.
if you know that, you're okay. You can
Yeah.
just make the translation, but it's figuring that out that we need to do.
And as we talked in that other
Session.
session, that I think we have to sort of look at, you have to interpret them, and it's not a level. We have to go back to that idea of skills and really forget the level. It might just be identifying a gap, right? So it's a starting level where we have to go back and review, I think. So, but there is some education involved in that, and I think that, I think that there can be, there can be some inaccuracy perhaps, but if you're using them for driving your program, your individual program or your programs, then I think it's already accurate. I think you're gonna be doing a good job of filling in gaps, personally.
Yeah,
In my
and,
experience.
and I agree, if you use it the right way.
Well, I was just going to say too, it is a starting point.
Yeah.
And some of our students have skills at a higher level, but it identifies that they might have something at grade 8 that they're missing. So that's where they start. Doesn't mean that
Well,
it's a starting point.
And what
that's
it
all.
does is if you ignore the numbers and you look at the prescriptions that it generates, because all you have to do is hit a little button and it says prescriptions, and you get the test results, and then you get a list of all the Plato stuff that are gonna get that student from grade 7 where they're at to grade 12 where you want them to be.
Yeah.
So really, it does all of that work for you of identifying, well, okay, where do they need to do fractions? You don't have to analyze the test, it's been done, it's all there for you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna,
Is there anything else you want to say? Because it is the last presentation of the day. So if there's questions you want to ask, if there's something, I don't want to cut off a good discussion, but.
and I knew it was at the end of the day and my timing is off. I'm doing this again tomorrow morning. I do have some slides on how we have set up our particular curriculum using these two things. I can show you how a day is set up in the program, which you might find interesting. That's about all I'm not getting to, and now that I know it takes this long, tomorrow morning I'll get to it. So thank you for tolerating 3/4 of my presentation.